Okay, sorry for the delay, everybody. Thank you so much for waiting.
All right, yeah, so this is Matti Huot,
Yes.
who is professor of philosophy and senior fellow at Aalto University in Finland, and Amanda Sukenick. Sukenick is a longtime anti-natalist activist who now studies philosophy at University of Chicago's Master of Arts program in the humanities. Their book Anti-natalism, Extinction and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption was published in 2024 by University Press. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Matti couldn't be here, but he says hello to everybody. So thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. The title of this conference invites us to address the virtues and vices of having children. Now, there are two ways of doing that. The first is to define the virtues and vices involved in bearing and rearing children under the assumption that reproduction is a good practice and a desirable activity. Normal people would go for this alternative. The second way is to challenge the assumption and ask whether reproduction really is a good practice and is a desirable activity. We have chosen the latter approach and will come to the conclusion that it is not. Fair warning. Due to our starting point, the presentation may contain traces of bold interpretation, or to put it another way, this is not Aristotle. It is a photograph of a 14th century sculpture of Aristotle. The same logic applies to our presentation. Okay. We have started by considering the 4 Aristotelian moral personality types, identified and compared in chapter 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Virtuous, Encratic, which means weak-willed, incontinent, lacking self-control. Encratic, strong-willed, continent, self-controlled, and vicious. The virtuous, according to Aristotle, know what is good or worth pursuing, and since their practical reason works impeccably, they automatically, spontaneously pursue it. The Encratic also knows what is good, but instead of following their practical reasons, succumb to temptations and desires and fail to pursue it. The Encratic know the good and feel tempted, but like the Acratic, thanks to their strong will, stay the course and act like the virtuous do, perhaps reluctantly but firmly. The vicious know the good, but not necessarily the same good as the others, and pursue that. We'll come to their position later. For now, their traditional good. According to Aristotle, the traditional good consists of at least 3 basic elements: survival, shelter, nutrition, well-being, bearing and rearing offspring, and using reason and seeking knowledge. But what if some of these come into conflict? Schopenhauer had this to say about reason and reproduction. Imagine for a moment that the act of procreation were neither a need nor accompanied by lust, but a matter of pure rational consideration. Could humankind still exist then? Wouldn't everyone have had so much compassion for the coming generations that they would rather not spare them the burden of existence, and at least not wanted to coldly impose it upon them? Schopenhauer, of course, didn't believe that we are guided by pure rational reason, but that aside. Those who carried forward the torch of pessimism and nihilism, especially Philip Mainlander and the pseudonymous Koenig, did hold that life is miserable and meaningless, not worth co-creating, which led the Roman Catholic Church, spearheaded by Pope Leo XIII, to revisit the doctrine of Thomas Aquinas to formulate the life-applauding philosophy of Neophylism, all at the end of the 19th century. But there was one person in particular who has been found recently who is of great interest to us here. And that is Marie Huot, a French poet, writer, feminist, anarchist, activist, animal rights advocate, and secretary of the Popular League Against Vivisection, a co-founder of the first animal hospital in France, notorious, for instance, for her demonstration interrupting a vivisectionist lecture by Louis Pasteur. What we're interested here is in her public address, The Pain, or Misery, or Evil of Living, delivered in 1892 and published in 1909. Her point was to defend the legitimacy of contraception and, covertly, terminations of pregnancy, but her ornamental prose extended further to the condemnation of all human reproduction, as seen here. How dare those that have just closed graves start over with cradles? Sorry about that. How dare those who have just closed graves start over again with cradles? Who does not recoil in horror at this cosmic circle, where love and death shuttle back and forth between embryos and corpses? At this macabre nature, this lecherous, gluttonous ghoul, disgorging generation after generation, crushing them under their own torrent of shallowing, and all-consuming bitch, this vomit of Fetian specters. Who does not feel the formidable and vengeful urge to leap at the monster's throat, to plug its mouth and entrails, and to sink this great incubus, this tenebrious pan, into the rest of nothingness? Which, of course, is, shall we say, colorful language and all that, but we can concentrate on the message. And doing that, we immediately encounter this objection. But if we do not have offspring, humankind will face extinction. Surely this must be a reductio ad absurdum against all such views. Well, maybe, but according to Io, she continues, obviously the world will come to an end sooner or later, and I, for one, have no problem with that. I don't even mind glimpsing into the midst of eternity and seeing the earth finally plunged of its human microbes, left to the wild flora and fauna, awaiting the blessed day when it is stripped of the last instance of life. In the title of our presentation, we mentioned Efilism, a more contemporary doctrine, and associated it with Io. Let's see how that connection can be justified. Efilism is an online rather than academic philosophy, and the word Efilism was coined in 2011 by the blogger Inventum. Although invented more than a century after Io, it bears a natural similarity to her message, Efil in the name being life reversed. This is how an EFIList, I actually, encapsulated Inventum's main points a decade ago on the website. Life is crude forces in control of precious commodities, and human life is perpetuated only out of the blind, insane desires of our addicted psychologies. Why create need machines who can never satisfy their desire without imposing unfulfilled desire onto something else? Life is an imposition, and the EFIList believes that we do not have the right to create need for no need, and force another generation to play out the same tragic and tired Shakespearean stuff film. We can control exactly how much suffering and death exists on this planet. There is no suffering without sentience, and the best outcome for life on planet Earth is extinction through a collective act of non-procreation. Well, details may vary and wordings differ, but all in all, Io would probably have commended Inventum's ideas. Formulated without any knowledge of her existence, Marie Huot was only brought to the attention of the EFIList and related communities a few years ago by the Anti-natalist YouTuber and activist Lawrence Anton. Be that as it may, our main point is to see how Huot's views, EFIList or not, can be analyzed in terms of virtues, vices, incontinence, and continence. Aristotle's take on people's practical, including moral thinking, can be expressed in the form of practical syllogisms, proceeding from goals and beliefs to intentions and actions. This practical syllogism for the virtuous, to use a simple example of catching a train, could be, I don't want to miss the train. I can't avoid missing the train unless I run. Therefore, I run. For the virtuous is automatic and spontaneous. With those premises, they run if not prevented. Similarly, the practical syllogism for the Encratic goes, I do not want to miss the train. I cannot avoid missing the train unless I run, but if I run, I sweat. I don't want to sweat, so I don't run. This is quite self-explanatory. I know what is good for me, what I rationally want, but confront an inconvenience and fail to act according to my reason. But then, how to apply this to our current case, reproduction? Here is a possible, formally valid, practical syllogism for the Encratic EFIList. I do not want to act against nature. I can't avoid acting against nature unless I participate in the procreative practice. And the virtuous conclusion here would be, I participate in the procreative practice. But, continues the Encratic, if I participate in the procreative practice, I must face the inconvenience of bearing and rearing children. I don't want to face the inconvenience of bearing and rearing children, so I don't participate in the procreative practice. And this is all fine and well, but how credible is it in the case of EFILists, or, as we have now specified, Marie Huot? Let's take another sample of her confessions. And here we go. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. And here we go. This is after she has described some children torturing kittens. Her own solution is to go to the root of the matter. It is quite simple to wait for the female cat to trap her when she is about to give birth, and then, for the sake of reason and compassion, take the newborn ones one by one as they emerge from her womb, tightly grasp them by the neck, and plunge into a bucket of water so that they die immediately without ever having lived. And then her own thinking and actions. I have been killing animals at home for 20 years now, and I would consider these executions a duty, a sacred duty that I would like everyone to fulfill. It is not without hesitation nor tears that I have arrived at this point. Each time my spirit and my body are engaged in war, and the ending susum corda with a sob. I always screw that word up, sorry. Now, our question is, are these the words of an Encratic, weakly-willed woman, one who is afraid to face inconveniences? Of course not. In her own words, she considers these executions a sacred duty which she fulfills, although her feelings and instincts rip her apart. A more fitting diagnosis of her would be Encratic. Her syllogism then would end, I don't want to drown kittens, but due to my strong will, reason and compassion prevail, so I drown kittens. But all this, of course, comes down to one question. Can lack of suffering, even accompanied by absence of future life, be a good human goal? If not, her behavior would have to be categorized as vicious, wicked, bad, and condemnable. So let's carry on with a new flipboard for a brief excursion into life and its value. This is from our ongoing investigations and not necessarily mentioned in the text we have sent to the organizers in advance, but no worries, nothing here contradicts our written version, just complements it. In the Aristotelian context, life is ideally seen as a pursuit of flourishing, and love of all life could well be a catchphrase. Apart from a few who can find intellectual or spiritual fulfillment in their existence, for the rest, this simply means cherishing the brute fact that life persists. And what then persists is, in Marie Huot's words, this macabre nature, this lecherous, gluttonous soul, this gorging generation after generation, crushing them under their own torrent and shallowing, and all-consuming bitch, this vomit of feti and specters, which is why Efilism opts for a different take, interpreting the upbeat-sounding pursuit of mediance. The fact that whatever human, sentient, or other living beings achieve, there will always be the next, yet unfulfilled need, desire, or aspiration. Instead of the constant chase for flourishing, they can then prefer serenity, calmness, and the absence of struggle. Love of all life can be on their agenda, this time explicitly all life, including human, sentient, and just organic. Since the ideal is that there would eventually be no life, the Efilist must be careful here not to be accused of hating the existence that they and others now have. Maybe a hate the sin, love the sinner type approach could work. Obviously, not in those exact words. But it could be a compassion for all the living, actual potential, where the point would be to help those who currently already live in need, and not to create more who would have all of these needless needs in the future. And so by that logic, lack of suffering or misery or endless struggle can, even if accompanied by an absence of future life, be a good human goal. The two main applications of this idea for Huot and other Efilists could be animal well-being and human or other reproduction. The practical syllogism for the virtuous vegan would then be, I don't want to contribute to the suffering of non-humans. I cannot avoid contributing to the suffering of non-humans unless I abstain from using factory-farmed animal products. I abstain from using factory-farmed animal products. And analogously, for the virtuous anthropocentric, which is human-centered anti-natalist, I don't want to contribute to the suffering of humans. I can't avoid contributing to the suffering of humans unless I abstain from participating in the procreative practice. I abstain from participating in the procreative practice. And with that, my work here is done. Marie Huot has broken the cycle of more lives for the sake of more lives, new need for the sake of new need. Thank you.